Hey everyone, I am at an Intel event joined by the Chief Core Architect, Ronak Singhal, and we're going to be talking about a couple of topics today. One of the most important is the new Cove CPUs. And just to give you some background, Ronak here worked on Nehalem previously.
That's right.
So you led the performance focus of that.
Yep.
And so he's been working with Intel for a while now.
22 years.
22 years. And Nehalem, I think, is probably close to a lot of you. So anyone who got their start with Nehalem like I did with overclocking, this is the interview you'll want to see. Before that, this video is brought to you by Thermal Grizzly and their high-end thermal compounds. Thermal Grizzly makes cryonaut paste for high thermal performance and conductivity without being electrically conductive, so you don't have to worry about shorting components. Cryonaut is particularly good for replacing stock GPU pastes, as Cryonaut is a non-curing compound. Learn more at the link in the description below. So let's start with a really top-level thing here, because no one at this point knows what Cove is outside of this event. So what is Cove, and then we'll drill into it.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. You know, Cove is our next new microarchitecture. So we've had the long line of products that we've built on the Skylake microarchitecture with Skylake, Kaby Lake, and Coffee Lake. What we talked about today for the first time was detailing what we're going to build on our next new microarchitecture. Like you said, codenamed Cove. It's going to go into a wide range of products, standard PCs, laptops, desktops, all the way to our Xeons on the data center side. And so what we talked about today is what are the big steps that we're taking with Cove in terms of general purpose performance, make the machine more powerful, as well as new instructions and new capabilities that we're adding to the processor itself to enhance algorithms like machine learning or cryptography.
Right. There's been a lot of advancement on the graphics front too, which is perhaps a different topic, but some of the big ones you were talking about in your presentation, so you had Spectre and Meltdown mitigations in hardware now. We were talking about 14 nanometer improvements and how that's actually, it gets brushed off a lot. We've brushed it off because you see plus, it loses the magic of it, but to Intel's credit, 14 nanometer has had significant performance uplift.
Right. Yeah, no, and that's a great point. So, you know, with Cove, the first products with Cove will be on 10 nanometer, but in the meantime, we do continue to advance what we can do on 14 nanometer, both through what we do on the design and architecture side, as well as on the manufacturing side. So we've increased the frequency, you know, from the first Skylakes from, 4.2-ish gigahertz, now we're up to 5 gigahertz.
5.0, yeah.
You know, with some of the products. On the data center side, we're enhancing the architecture with new instructions for machine learning, for both inference and training, that will give us a really nice speed up as well there.
So what is your biggest challenge when you're talking about, before we even get into Cove in any detail, what's your biggest challenge when you're trying to work with 14 nanometer and continue to push it? Is it thermal envelope? Is it, what's going on?
Yeah, it's actually in some ways easier to work with a mature process technology like 14 nanometer because you have a lot of information about it, you understand all about it and what its nuances are. So really finding a way to just continue to push the envelope on the performance, especially through frequency, is something we've been able to successfully take advantage of over the last year or so.
Right. And then on Cove, so let's touch on this one. You can't talk frequency today.
Right.
So just get that out of the way right now. Can't talk overclocking today. What can we talk about? We can talk about
yeah, so
start?
Where we'd start today is to say, this is the base foundation, the microarchitecture for the products that will come later on, right? And like I said, those products, you'll see desktop products, you'll see PC products and so forth. But the base capabilities, those give us the fundamental throughput advantages to give you higher performance in addition to wherever the frequency ends up with these products. So how do I increase the smartness of the machine, build in new algorithms? How do I increase the number of operations I can do every clock? Right, just that helps any of the applications that are out there, whether it's games or multimedia applications or name your favorite application. Really, so our focus is speed those all up.
With IPC, what do you look at to improve IPC at this point?
Yeah, there are actually two ways to answer that. First of all, when we're doing our analysis, what kind of workloads do I look at to say, how do I tell if I'm actually increasing performance? So we look at a lot of games, we look at a lot of multimedia applications, we'll look at a lot of things also on the server side of things, because we're building a core to span that wide range. And we want to choose advancements that help everybody across that, but there will be things that are more specific to, say, a laptop part or a desktop part, right, that we do. What are the kinds of things we do? We do things like expanding the ability to find more instructions to operate in parallel. We do things like making our caches bigger. One of the things we talked about today is we're increasing the first level data cache size by 50%.
Yeah, that was a big one. So let me interject here. For people watching, what if they leave a comment and say, well, why didn't you do that before?
Yeah, and the first level data cache is one of the most fundamental pieces of your microarchitecture. And it's always a really tricky balance between capacity and latency and bandwidth.
Right.
And so we've really been focused on trying to maintain the latency as much as possible and really expanding the bandwidth over the last few generations. And if you go back to what we were doing, you mentioned Nehalem, use that as a reference point. I could do one load, one store at a time, and there were 16 bytes wide. Now I can do, today in Skylake, 2 loads, 1 store, and I can do them up to 64 bytes wide. What we talked about today is now we're doing 2 loads and 2 stores,
right.
and we're increasing the capacity, and we're maintaining the latency. So it's really, how do you balance those 3 vectors of latency, capacity, and bandwidth?
Right, that makes sense. Speaking of balancing things with the security mitigations in hardware, so Spectre and Meltdown, big topic the last year or so now. How do you deal with Spectre and Meltdown getting thrown into the mix of things? Because I would imagine the threat there is you might lose some performance in exchange for preventing those attacks. So how do you prevent them? And
no, it's a great question. I mean, Spectre and Meltdown was something that over the past year has been a lot of focus and attention from us, both for our existing products as well as for our future products. So we now have products shipping today that have hardware mitigations for some of the cases, like the Spectre V3, or sorry, the
Version
Meltdown
2,
case, right? And that happens in Whiskey Lake. We'll have coming soon on the data center side and later on the client side, mitigations for what was called Spectre V2, the branch target injection case. All of these are things where we now have a chance to harden the microarchitecture, put in hooks in the heart in the microarchitecture, and like you said, provide the protection while bringing back the performance.
So what? How long did you personally have to work on tackling this problem? Because I think the researchers exposed it to Intel, AMD, all the other affected parties, at least 6 months ahead of public announcement.
Right, that's exactly right. So, I was working on that starting late last summer, basically. I mean, even when I took my summer vacation last year, while on summer vacation every day, it was, I would dial in to
That's a great thing to have, in the middle of summer vacation.
But, it was something that, it was that important to us, and it was something we had to invest in, and we understood that, the landscape had changed in some ways, because these were new vulnerabilities that these researchers did a really good job in identifying, right? So working with them, working with others in the ecosystem, that's one of the really good things that's come out of this, is working with all of our software partners to understand what can be done across the ecosystem.
Right. And then, let's see, so for Sunny Cove, you had your 3 topics. There was security at the beginning, you talked about.
Right.
Deeper, you talked about a wider aspect.
And
smarter, right. So we went through a little bit of those already, but when you're talking about wider, what are we looking at for Sunny Cove?
Wider, part of it is I now have more functional units. We already talked about, for instance, I can now do 2 loads and 2 stores at a time. We also introduced, for instance, on the vector side, the ability for certain operations where we could do 1 per cycle, now we can do 2 per cycle in some cases. So those are the kinds of examples of making things wider, just finding opportunities to do more work at the same time.
Does this increase the package size in a meaningful way, or do you just cram more into the same?
Well, so remember that the first products with Sunny Cove will be on 10 nanometers, so we get the advantage of the shrink factor by moving to the new process technology. So again, the overall package size will be a function of the product in terms of number of cores and so forth. So we'll have more of those details later on.
Right. Let me throw 2 here that are kind of general for you. So let's talk about AVX a little bit. That came up briefly today. First question for you. This is not specific to Sunny Cove, but just Intel in general and talking thermals.
Okay.
So for AVX, everyone pretty much knows Prime, Blender as a real world example. They really burn the CPU. Why is AVX so much hotter than any other application?
Okay. Yeah, and so AVX and SIMD processing in general is interesting, right? If you're able to take good advantage of these instructions, it's actually very energy efficient because there's less instructions going through the machine to do the same amount of work. However, at any given point in time, instead of doing 2 multiplies or 4 multiplies, I'm doing more of them at the same time. So at any given point in time, you actually are doing more work in the processor, and more work takes more power.
Right.
So there are cases, like you're saying, where you will see power go up as a result of AVX.
Yeah, and we saw, as a recent example, we retested the 2600K Sandy Bridge, and the performance difference there in Blender versus modern CPUs was nonlinear compared to for example, a 7700K, 8700K, 9900K, which part of that is, of course, cores. Then part of it, I think, is the AVX capabilities too. So there's a significant performance benefit.
You know, and that's one of the things we always tell people is as we add new capabilities and new instructions, there's a lot of opportunity for performance if people are tuning their software.
Right.
And AVX is a great example of that.
Right. And anything you want to plug here for Sunny Cove at the end? I mean, what's really interesting you?
Well, to me, you know, each of these projects that we work on, whether it's a Nehalem or a Sandy Bridge or a Skylake, it's a long journey. And to get to the point where we're about to get it into your customers' hands, is an exciting time just to see what people think of it, right? Because we're very excited about all the work we've poured into it.
How long does this process take?
It's longer than building a cake or building a baby.
Right. It's years, right?
Yeah.
So even just taping out takes a while.
It's a several-year development cycle on these. That's right.
Right. Well, for more information, check the description below. We'll have a link to one of our articles or something like that. And thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
We'll see you all next time.